Hey, what's up? It's Jim, and today I'm going to talk about the film Crybaby from 1990. And this is continuing my series where I review all the films directed by John Waters. And Crybaby really was his Hollywood movie. He had more mainstream hits like Polyester and Hairspray, but those were really more accidental. And to be honest, they weren't really that big as people like to make them out to be. Particularly Hairspray did well, but wasn't as successful as people act like it was. Even Waters admits that. Because of the perceived success, as he calls it, of Hairspray, there started to be a bidding war by some of the biggest studios in town over John Waters' next project, which was Crybaby. And Crybaby could not be made on a smaller budget like Hairspray or any of his other films. To make a musical, you need a lot of money. And this is John Waters' musical. It's his only musical. A lot of people act like Hairspray is his musical, mainly because of the Broadway show and the actual musical movie, but it's a dance movie. Crybaby is his musical. There's people singing, doing musical numbers. That's a musical. He needed the support of Hollywood to get this made, so he made this at Imagine and Universal. I don't think this film had the greatest reputation when it opened and the years after its release, because as I got into John Waters, this was kind of the movie that I went, oh, what's this thing between Hairspray and Serial Mom? It felt like I heard a lot about both of those films, and then Crybaby was kind of the monkey in the middle, and I didn't really know much about it. And then I eventually saw it and went, why didn't more people like this movie? And it just seems that because it's not really appealing to his typical demographic, it kind of looks like it's more of a teen movie and less of a John Waters movie, even though if you actually see it, it's very much a John Waters movie. And also because I think maybe it had felt like he was selling out more than before after DVD and it playing on TV as much as it did, and the rise of Johnny Depp as a movie star. This is actually the first film that Johnny Depp was the star of. He had been in Platoon and Nightmare on Elm Street and various other films and 21 Jump Street. This is the first film where he is the top billed star of the movie. This is the very first one, was a John Waters film. And because of that and the DVD boom, which happened right around the time where Johnny Depp's career really took off with Pirates of the Caribbean, this film got a significant DVD release. It got played on TV quite a bit, mainly because of him and because of his reputation. The perception of this movie changed over the years because of the people who at the time were into Waters didn't really like it. The kids who didn't really care about that and were just into like this campy romp of a teen musical were totally into it. It is kind of a weirder, strange movie. People kind of got into it, and it eventually became a more significant entry into his filmography than it was before, especially because this is the first starring role of Johnny Depp, and that's fairly significant whether you like what that eventually begat or not. It's one of John Waters' films that didn't really go over that well when it was initially released, but over time it became more and more of a cult classic. A relationship between Crybaby Walker, played by Johnny Depp, and Allison, played by Amy Locane. And Johnny Depp is a drape, a rockabilly kid with a leather jacket who looks like he's trouble, and then Allison, who is a part of the Squares, and it puts the whole town in upheaval because a drape and a square have fallen in love, and the Squares are trying to stop Crybaby and Allison from being together, even though Allison very much wants to be with Johnny Depp and be a drape instead of being a square. And these two sides fight it off as the Squares try to escalate things with the drapes and get them in more and more trouble, even though Crybaby and Allison's love can't be denied despite this Capulets and Montagues type situation that's going on. One of the themes that goes throughout almost every John Waters movie is kind of this good bad versus scenario, kind of almost a class idea of the lower class versus the upper class, and the square drapes thing fits into that perfectly. That's the interesting thing about John Waters films, is as much as the ratings change or how acceptable it is to watch, the idea that was in Pink Flamingos goes into Hairspray, goes into Polyester, and goes into Crybaby, and that is the Squares are very much like the people who are competing with Divine to be the filthiest people alive. In this, they're competing for the love of Allison over the drapes and Crybaby Walker, played by Johnny Depp. And it's just something that's been going on throughout his work, pretty much through most of his films, and it fits perfectly into this send-up of the teen movie from the 50s turned into a musical. This film's a little weird because it takes Mimi Van Doren, Sal Mineo type kind of B teen movies and mixes them with Elvis movies, but is actually talking about a time time, pre-Elvis, during rockabilly. It's really his other period piece. It's his other nostalgia piece. This does kind of go hand in hand with Hairspray. I like the idea of this movie. I like how it combines a lot of kind of 50s B things. It makes some references to a bunch of Elvis movies, particularly with Crybaby's bed that's kind of on a dolly. Same with when Allison's singing and she's moving away from the stage in a little bit. That was something from Elvis movies visually that he put in Crybaby. And it's interesting that he's kind of mixing and matching 50s teen ideas. As much as he's breaking the rules of the time period, he's using them to kind of make an interesting kind of send up. Some people, I've heard it called satire, but I don't think it's really satirizing anything. I just think it's kind of a fun send up kind of romp of it. One of the things I was always captured by this movie is how much fun it really was and how enjoyable it is. Most of the positive reviews of Crybaby bring up how much fun it is and how much of a good light comedy it was. And that's really how you should be taking down Crybaby. I think a lot of people were surprised by that because it's not disgusting, and there's still that ongoing thing in Waters stuff at this point where they're like, oh, how could this guy who made Pink Flamingos? We've kind of gone past that at this point. This is like the third movie past the disgusting period, so like let's just seriously let it go. And maybe people were reacting to the fact that it seemed to be like now he was having a lot of stars in his movies. This had a bunch of guest stars, a bunch of bigger names. I mean, certainly it was Johnny Depp's first starring vehicle. That would later become a big thing. It was still a big thing at the time. This also had like Iggy Pop, Ricky Lake, Susan Terrell, Polly Bergen, Willem Dafoe in a small part. Patty Hearst made her first appearance of many appearances in John Waters films. David Nelson, Troy Donahue, Tracy Lord, Kim McGuire, and Kim Webb. And I think people were just kind of starting to realize like, oh, this is what a John Waters movie is going to be. And that's kind of what the rest of them would be. Kind of almost these Woody Allen-esque casts where you're just like shocked he could get all these people. It is the first film after Divine died. So I think there's a lot of reaction to this film that was kind of unwarranted. It was kind of just reacting to what had happened to his career rather than accepting the movie itself, because most of the negative things act like he kind of sold out, but it's very much in his style. He didn't change his style to be more commercial. I don't really understand not liking that film because it's more of a teen thing, because it's not like he made a John Hughes movie. And this wasn't really a hit with teens at the time because it's a send up of movies that they probably have not seen ever. With any luck, they may have seen Rebel Without a Cause and maybe an Elvis movie, but a film that's referencing them so heavily. And John Waters even noted things with the poster where you look at the poster and it looks like he's playing a teen idol, but it's really like this romance kind of musical send-up thing. I don't think people got it. I don't think people in 1990 were ready for this film. It did open like around the same time as Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which was a huge hit, which probably kind of buried it, and it probably took up a lot of the movie-going attention. So it still did okay. It was the widest release ever, I think, of a John Waters movie, or one of the widest releases for a John Waters movie before they had to like slowly roll out. But this was like just open wide initially, and mainly because it was a big Hollywood production. Johnny Depp actually got paid $1 million for it. It's kind of interesting that it ended up being his first starring role, because it actually, he admitted in an interview on the DVD, he thinks that one of the good things that came out of Crybaby was that he was able to do Edward Scissorhands and start his relationship with Tim Burton and really start his movie star career, which has always been a little odder, a little stranger. Crybaby really set off that career in motion. He was satirizing his own teen idol image is part of why he did it. Tracy Lords does that as well in this. So in a way, John Waters really helped shape one of the bigger movie stars of our era. What's interesting about this movie being a musical is how it doesn't let go of the structure of a usual John Waters film and is still a musical. And what I think Waters understood with his structure, and he does the same thing in Hairspray, and he does it in a lot of his films, where early on you really meet the character. You meet them early. You understand who Crybaby Walker is. You understand his gang with Ricky Lake and Tracy Lords and all those guys. And then by the end, when you have all these musical numbers and all this big stuff happening and there's no time for exposition and character development, he almost is exclusively doing musical numbers. And it's interesting that that same thing happens in Hairspray. It almost feels like Hairspray isn't spending as much time with Tracy Turnblad as it is in the beginning. And in this film, he does the same thing. And it's interesting how connected I I am with that finale because I spent all that time. And it's almost like he perfectly knew a structure, and how this musical works is there's not really a song and dance number that's not someone performing. Like early on when we have the squares and the cloisters, which is actually, by the way, where my parents got married, and Will Smith and Jada got married there as well, but the place where the squares are performing early in the film is actually where my parents got married. Early on you see people performing for the squares, and then you see the Drapes performance where he's the king crybaby and all that stuff. It's not until like Teardrops Are Fallen and then Do in Time for Being Young that you really get a song that's not someone performing like on a stage. You've really gone through a couple acts at that point before you get to a real technically like musical sequence. Not to say those aren't musical or something, but there's kind of a difference. And then it really starts hitting you with a ton of musical sequences. Even like High School Hellcats like still kind of combines the two, but then they just really go into musical sequences with like Please Mr. Jailer and all that stuff. They really don't get into the full-blown musical until like this film is really into its runtime, like I'd say a good 20 minutes or so, which is kind of interesting. And it shows, as much as this was like a send-up of these kind of movies, that if we really understood the Drapes and got who they were and got this dynamic and this group and who these characters were, then we'd be more into them and we could follow them. It's kind of a richer movie for it. I think I like how he does that structure, and it kind of works very well for a musical. It's similar to what they do in action movies, where you really have to know the character, so then in the end, where you have all these like big explosions and stuff, you actually kind of give a shit. It's interesting that this ends up being his big Hollywood movie, but it's still very much him being an auteur. I really don't think Imagine was developing this kind of a movie if Waters didn't pitch it to them. It doesn't really feel like him being a studio director. He's still John Waters. He's still doing a lot of crazy things. Most of it is having a crazy cast and having Allison drink her own tears, which now grosses me out a little thinking about it. It's not like he really changed. He just kept evolving. The first time I saw this, I don't know how many people watching rented videos from the video store, but when you did, you had it for a couple days, and sometimes you just end up watching a VHS 2 or 3 times just because you were bored and you had it there and you didn't have to return it yet. And the first time I rented Crybaby, I think I watched it 3 or 4 times that weekend because I was just so into it. I love the songs to it. I love the flow to it. It's like a really funny, strange movie. It's weird that Patty Hearst is Tracy Lord's mom. I love the send up to it because I, through Mystery Science Theater mostly, but I knew about 50s B teen movies, and so I totally got a lot of the references, and I really fell in love with this movie. And I thought it was kind of just this odd pick in his filmography after he had kind of done more mainstream movies, but it kind of became a bigger movie. I actually do like Tracy Lord. This was kind of like one of her first like mainstream Hollywood movies, and then she would go on to have more of a legitimate acting career. This is right around the time it had been found out that she had starred in all those porn movies underage, and having Patty Hearst be her mom and David Nelson be her dad. I love the character in this because I like that her parents are like the nicest people in the world, and she's like this rebellious asshole teen, and it like doesn't make any sense, but that's like kind of what makes it funny. The scene where she says like, "Get me the fuck out of here." I like the chemistry between them. That's played very well. Waters brings up in the commentary, people say it's like stunt casting. With Patty Hearst, I guess it is, but he gets her to work really well. Like, she's actually fairly funny in this movie. There's a lot of really good scenes with Patty Hearst and Tracy Lords. Tracy Lords was having like kind of a tough time with the FBI trying to subpoena her during this movie, which is like fucking ridiculous. The only person I don't like is Amy LaCaine. Everyone else is kind of gets the joke of it, is very self-aware in their performance, and it very much works for it. And she just feels like she's bad, and she's a bad actress in a B movie, and it kind of like works for what the movie's doing, but she got really lucky. I like Hatchet Face quite a bit, played by Kim McGuire. A lot of people thought she was going to be like a big new John Waters star, and I can't remember her in anything else after that. I think it's a fun romp of a film, and I've never watched this film and been disappointed by it. It's kind of like a light, fun musical. It's always just a fun, enjoyable movie to watch. It does have a great energy to it. It does have that great underdog story that a good John Waters movie of course has, and have underdog quality that everyone kind of can relate to it. And also like the squares really fucking suck. So you kind of want them to win in the end. And it does have that idealized 50s energy throughout it that Grease also had, but I think this is kind of a little more off-center, a little more offbeat. This feels a little more genuine because it's going into the deep cuts of the era while also having original stuff and referencing a lot of things. John Waters doesn't do a lot of style parodies. He did certainly with Polyester, but he did it again with Crybaby to make a really just fun, enjoyable kind of 50s rock musical in a way that only really John Waters could. So if you have seen Crybaby and you would like to talk about it, then comment below in the comments and subscribe if you would like to. And check out my John Waters review playlist. I have all of the previous John Waters films in that playlist if you'd like to check out those reviews. And if you're watching this later, the ones after this as well, hopefully. The other one thing that I couldn't put in this review, but it's also kind of interesting, is there's this kids TV show host in Baltimore called Kenny Curtis, and he also hosted a kids radio show. But he's in this movie, and I know most people probably don't know who that is. If you're right around my age, you probably remember Kenny Curtis, and I met him once, and he was very nice, but he's in this movie. He's in the Squares gang, and he's in a lot of this movie, and it's his only film role according to IMDb. But every time I watch it, I think about Kenny Curtis on Fox 45. I actually think he's quite good in this film, but I also think it's probably because I have a sentimental attachment to Kenny Curtis and watching him every day introduce like Tiny Toon Adventures and such. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.